Hi, I'm Dan Danford. We're doing a series of podcasts called Money Made Easy for DadsDivorce.com. We usually take a question that's come to us from a viewer of the website, and I try to answer it as best I can. Today's question actually is one that we encounter fairly frequently, and it deals with a concept called rebalancing. A real simple question: how often should I be rebalancing my portfolio? There's a whole field of study today called behavior economics or behavioral finance. And what it looks at is kind of the intersection between investment and finance and psychology. And one of the lessons that comes out of behavioral finance is the notion that as humans we tend to want to sell our success stories too early, and we tend to hold on to our losers too long. And if you've been investing at any point in time in the past, you probably recognize that tendency in yourself. It just feels so good to sell something at a profit, and it hurts so bad to sell something at a loss that we tend to hold on to the winners for too short a period and hold on to the losers way too long. Well, rebalancing makes us fight that tendency. Basically, back in 15, 20 years ago, there's been a lot of research that's been done, and one of the things that came out of that research is the notion of what we call asset allocation. It basically says that most investment performance comes from the mix of investments you have rather than the individual investments. So it matters less whether you own IBM or Hewlett-Packard, and it matters more whether you have stocks in your portfolio, whether you have bonds in your portfolio, and whether you have cash in your portfolio. So that mix of stocks, bonds, and cash is called asset allocation. And that's where most of us spend most of our time, because that's what generates most of the investment performance in a portfolio. Now, once you set up this asset allocation, maybe you're going to have some portion in large company stocks and some portion in small company stocks and some portion in international stocks, along with a portfolio segment in bonds and a portfolio segment in cash. Once you decide on that mix, then all of those assets change value on a recurring basis. Many of them are actually repriced every single day. So occasionally rebalancing the portfolio, what it basically does is it makes you sell some of the asset segments that have been winners and reinvest the proceeds in the parts that are losers. So let's say you have a period of time where large company stocks do very, very well and small company stocks don't do so well. Then the rebalancing process will make you take some of the money out of large company stocks and plow it into small company stocks. Now that's a winner from a portfolio standpoint, because next month or next quarter or next year it might be the small company stocks that do well and the large company stocks that don't do so well. So periodically rebalancing kind of forces you to fight that human tendency, which is to sell things too quickly and hold on to things too badly. So it's a process. Now, that much almost everybody agrees on. Where we have disagreement is how often to do it. Okay? Everybody agrees that rebalancing occasionally is a good thing, but there's been a lot of study and a lot of speculation as to how often you should do that. And the jury's out on that, actually. Some studies show you should do it fairly frequently. Some studies show you should do it fairly infrequently. For me and my company, we tend to not do it so regularly. We tend to hold on, giving things an opportunity to profit before we plow the money into the things that haven't. Okay? So I would say my tendency would be every year or maybe even longer than that. But like I said, there's disagreement about that. Some people think you should force it more often than that. Here are kind of my rules of thumb that I use. One thing would be to set up some kind of regular schedule. Whether that's a year, a year and a half, or 2 years, I would revisit the portfolio occasionally and at least at regular intervals, look at whether or not to rebalance, okay? Don't necessarily have to do it every time, but you can look at it every once in a while on a regular basis and then decide what to do. The other step would be to look for changes in the marketplace. In other words, if you have a real dramatic step up in the stock market or a real dramatic step down in the stock market, now's the time to at least, again, look at rebalancing the portfolio. Okay, it'll make you take some money off the table from those winning asset classes and plow money into some that haven't done so well. A lot of professional investment people use tolerance bands to do this. In other words, once you set up your portfolio mix of large, mid, small company stocks, international stocks, bonds, and cash, you put in place, say, a 5% band or a 10% band, and any time one of those asset classes gets outside of that band, in other words, they jump up by 5% or they jump down by 5%, so they no longer are, say, 10% of your portfolio. Now they've become 15% of your portfolio. Then you step in and rebalance the entire portfolio. And I think that makes sense too. I think that's a good way to do it. Instead of having a regular period of time, use tolerance bands so that you step in when something dramatic has happened. And then the last one I'd talk about, and this is one that we use with great frequency when we're working with clients, is when somebody adds a big chunk of money to a portfolio or when somebody takes a big chunk of money out of the portfolio. I mean, that's an ideal time when new money flows into the portfolio to kind of rebalance the entire thing. If somebody calls and says, hey Dan, I need to take $15,000 out of my portfolio to buy a new car, okay, what we'll do is when we raise that $15,000, we'll take it out of those different asset classes and we might change each asset class a little bit so that when the portfolio is left after the $15,000 is out, then you've got kind of a rebalanced portfolio once again. And you do the same thing if somebody adds $15,000 or $20,000 to your portfolio. You use that new money to kind of rebalance the different segments so that you're back in whack again. I worked for many years with a fellow named Bob Siemens, who was an excellent investment manager. As a matter of fact, I spent 15 years of my career, but he probably had a 40-year career in investments. And one of the things he used to remind me about rebalancing a portfolio, he used to say, Dan, if you keep taking money out of your good things and plowing them into the bad things, eventually you'll have a whole portfolio of bad things. And of course that makes sense if that's all you did. And so I think rebalancing makes a lot of sense for a portfolio, but you have to keep in mind that that broad diversification, all those different asset classes are very, very important. And when you're taking out of winners, you're also putting into losers, but you also understand that those losers will have their day in the sun too. And eventually they'll become the winners that you'll be taking money out of. In other words, rebalancing is important to a portfolio, but it's only important in the context of a well-diversified, deliberately structured portfolio that owns a lot of different things. I hope that's been helpful. Like I said, there's both art and science here. There is no absolute answer or absolute best way to do it. Those are some ways to think about rebalancing, and I think if you'll choose one of them, or maybe work with a couple of them, you'll improve your portfolio returns overall. Hey, that's another episode of Money Made Easy. We'll look for you next week. Thanks.